Types of subqueries. There are two ways to define types of subqueries based on the information that is returned from the subquery. In the case of a single row or scalar subquery, we're actually using an equals to say check against the single value. And then in something called a multiple row subquery, we're using an in operator to check against membership within a set of multiple values or one or more values. And then we can also do multiple columns, which allow us to use both equals for a single pair of values. In this case, a pair, you could use 3, 4, 5, 1, 6, whatever you like. Or you could also use equals to check against a single value. The other way to define different types of subqueries is breaking up the correlated and regular. A regular subquery simply says there's no relationship between calling query and subquery information and asks if the category ID is contained within the set that you're calling from the show table, in this case. In the correlated query, you're saying that there's a distinct relationship between the two data sets, and you're saying go and select something from category where the category ID is contained within the set of values that establish a link. As you can see here, we read the category table and we assign an alias to the category table, and that alias is C for category. Within the subquery, we've gone and selected the category ID from the show table and said where a category ID, not defined, defaulted to the show table, is equal to C category ID from the calling query. So we're passing the category ID from each row pulled in the category table down into the subquery. So we're joining them together. This is known as a semi-join. So now let's look at example types of subqueries. And here's the work file I'm going to provide you, and I'm going to paste it into SQL Developer, and I'm going to talk. So this query here, highlight this, run this little guy here. What is it doing? It's finding all shows that are basically the category comedy. How? Because it's doing a subquery and it's finding the category ID for comedy, which is an individual value, making this a scalar query, and it's allowing you to say category ID must be equal to one value. Cannot have more values in this query or coming from this subquery with the equal sign. It will give me an error. We'll show you that in a minute. But essentially all we're doing is saying find all the shows that are comedy shows. And this shows you the details of how we actually build the query and come to that conclusion. This shows you all categories, and then when we run this one, it shows you just the comedy category. Let's go down to this query. Here we're actually saying a category ID is equal to a category query or subquery that returns multiple values. And as you can see, we've got lots of categories. When we run this query as a whole, what does it do? It gives us an error. The error says single row subquery returns more than one row. This is a problem because you cannot say something is equal to multiples, so Oracle simply throws it out as an error. And here's the explanation again, with a query returning lots of rows, and it should be one. Obviously we can fix that issue when we apply the where name equals comedy to pull a single row in the subquery and send that back as an equality test to the calling query. And then we get all the stuff that is comedy shows only. To run a multiple row subquery, we obviously want to put in multiple values. Well, we don't have to, but we can in the case of using in, where it says that category in is contained within the set of multiple values returned from this query. We run this query, we get lots of goodies. So now what we're actually doing here is we're finding all categories that have shows in the shows table. So we're finding all categories that have shows in my database. Multiple column subqueries allow us to pull, let's run this, two columns from this subset table. They can be 2, 3, 1, 6, whatever's in the table, and it allows me to test the combination of two columns from the call-in query against the called query. If I put 3 columns here and 2 there, it will give me a problem. If I put 1 and 2 and so on and so forth, it'll give me a problem. All this does, it checks 2 against 2. It's called a multiple column subquery. We could use equals in here and check for a single ticket result. In this case, this example is multiples. What we have here is a query that's actually looking at the same table twice and joining the table to itself. So it's saying find the name in the category where the category ID is in the category table. It's kind of nonsensical, but it demonstrates the process by which we find something that is within a set of more than one things. Obviously, this is going to find lots of category IDs. In this case, we use the same 2 tables, but what we do here is we actually establish a connection between the table in the subquery, which is not aliased, and the table in the parent query, which is aliased by the alias C, applied here, and applied here, which is passed down into the called query, or the subquery. And if we run this again, we find all the data.